wagon creaked like an old bone as it rolled into the Circle M yard, and the baby's breath was thin as paper. Sarah Finch pressed her ear to his chest and listened for the faint flutter that kept her moving. Wind lifted the red dust and set it drifting over the corrals, over the water tower, over the cookhouse with its tin chimney breathing heat. Somewhere close, a bell clanged, and a dog barked once, as if to declare she'd come too far to turn back. "Help," she said, not a shout, a prayer that had worn down to one brittle word. A tall man stepped from the cookhouse with a towel over his shoulder. He wore a dark apron, flour at the hip, heat in his stare. His hair had gone prematurely gray at the temples, but his face was steady, unafraid. He took in the wagon, the sunburn, the way she cradled the baby like a lantern shielding a last wick of fire. "What's wrong?" His voice was low and serviceable, like a tool that fit the hand. "Fever," she said. 3 days. Won't eat. Breath rattles." She lifted the child toward him before fear could argue. He didn't waste a heartbeat on doubt. He set the towel aside and eased the boy from her arms, with hands that remembered small weight. "Inside," he said and led the way. The cookhouse was bright and hotter than the yard, the big stove humming, bread cooling on a rack. A long table sat in the center like a workbench. He cleared a space with a sweep, knife, onions, a loaf, then spread a clean cloth and laid the boy down. Water hissed as he shifted a kettle off the flame. He moved without hurry, but nothing in him was slow. "Name?" "Thomas," she said. "Sarah Finch." "I'm Cole," he said. "Hold his head." She slid in close and cupped the baby's skull. Cole pressed 2 fingers under the jaw, counted. He watched the rise of the thin belly, the color high in the cheeks. He touched the fontanelle with a reverence that made her eyes sting. "He's dry," Cole murmured. "We'll pull the heat first." He took a crock from a shelf, uncorked a bottle, shook out dark drops, added water, a thread of honey, stirred until the surface went cloudy. The smell was medicinal and clean. He tipped a spoon against the baby's lip. Thomas fussed, swallowed, fussed again, swallowed. A good sign. Cole's breath left his chest the way a man loosens a cinch. "Where'd you come from?" he asked, not looking up. "North. 2 days out of Dry Creek. Horse went lame. I walked the last mile." He nodded like a foreman tallying costs. "You did right to come." Steam drifted. The kettle clicked as it settled. He dampened a cloth in tepid water and worked in circles. Hairline, throat, the small fists. The boy's skin steamed faintly, like rain off hot stone. Cole fed another spoon. He moved with the patience of someone who had learned the hard way that rushing breaks things. "Breathe, Thomas," Sarah whispered. "Stay." The child's chest hitched, then eased. The rattle softened. Cole lifted him into the bowl for a brief bath, one hand under the neck, the other rocking water across the ribs. When he brought him out, the fever's red had faded to a stubborn pink. He wrapped the boy and glanced at Sarah for the first time long enough to truly see her. Wind-tangled hair, cracked lips, eyes with too many nights in them. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday." "Sit," he said. "Bread, broth, slow." She shook her head. "He first." "He is," Cole said. He set a cup near her elbow anyway, as if to say a woman doesn't carry the world on air alone. Outside, spurs rang along plank. Boots thudded. Men's voices swelled and broke. The noon crowd. Cole didn't look toward the door. How do you know this?" Sarah asked, voice thin with hope and weariness. "You're the cook." "Learned some things," he said. "Not pride, not secrecy, just a fact that didn't ask for more talk." The first hands pushed in, dusty hats, hungry eyes. They took in the scene. The woman, the baby, the cook with sleeves rolled and jaw set. A lanky rider with a sunburned nose grinned automatically, then read the room and let the grin die. "Line up," Cole said, and that was that. The men stacked plates without noise, heaping stew, tearing bread. A few cut their eyes to Sarah, to Thomas. No one asked questions. Sarah ate because the cup was warm in her hands and because her hands wouldn't stop shaking until she gave them work. Broth slid down and made a small place of calm. She watched the man in the apron bend over her child and let a piece of herself unclench. Thomas sighed. His eyelids fluttered. A tiny hiccup. Cole touched the baby's sternum like a man testing a fence post. Good, he said quietly, almost to himself. We caught it. The door swung again, and a younger voice carried a slant of authority across the room. We feeding strays now, Cole? The room cooled by some degrees no fire could mend. Sarah turned. The speaker wore a clean shirt and a look that had learned command before it learned humility. His resemblance to no one was clear, but his entitlement fit the place like an expensive boot. Cole didn't move. Eat if you're hungry, Garrett. Garrett's gaze passed over Sarah like a weight. This isn't a charity house. He reached for coffee, considered, then set the pot down. And I didn't sign off on hiring beggars. Good thing I didn't ask, Cole said, still measuring drops into the spoon. Go eat. A chuckle died ragged in the line. The men kept their eyes down. Sarah stared at the knot in the table so she would not add fuel to whatever fire burned between these two. Garrett hovered a beat longer, then tossed a shrug meant for the whole room and left. The door breathed shut. Sound returned, slow and cautious. Cole fed the last spoon, wiped the damp from Thomas's neck, and lifted him to Sarah's arms. The weight felt real again. The boy's breathing had settled into the small, stubborn rhythm of a body that had decided to stay. Thank you, she said. 2 words with miles inside them. Keep him cool. Sips only. He'll sleep hard, Cole said. His eyes softened and then, just as quickly, he put the softness away. There's a cot in back. It's yours tonight. I can't pay, she said. You will, he answered, when you can. She should have argued. Pride wanted one more fight, but the baby was warm in the right way, and the cot had a clean quilt folded on it, and the smell of bread was the kind of kindness that doesn't ask your name before it helps you. She drifted to the back room while the men ate in low voices and the big stove breathed. The cot creaked like a ship settling at harbor. Thomas slept with his mouth open, the hint of milk on his breath. Sarah sat on the edge and let her boots stay on because she did not trust herself to bend. Sometime in the lean hours, she woke alone in the room to a sound like flint struck once. Not danger, a memory, a man clearing his throat for no one. She rose and found Cole at the long table under lantern light, ledger open, pencil moving. The apron was gone. A plain shirt had taken its watch. He had the look of a man counting what could be lost and what might be saved. You should sleep, she said. I will, he said, meaning later. He poured water into a tin cup and pushed it her way. How far were you going? Far enough not to hear my husband's cough in every corner, she said. The words surprised her with their plainness, but they landed and did not break anything. Cole's pencil went still. He was quiet long enough to make the silence feel like a clean plate. I'm sorry, he said. Not the kind that chases grief away, the kind that sits beside it. She nodded. I was going to look for work in Dry Creek. He looked at her hands the way a man sizes a tool. Can you cook for 30 men? I can try, she said. I can learn quick. He considered the ledger like it might have an answer. Roundup starts in a week, he said. Charlie left 2 weeks back. We've been making do. You're the cook, she said, meaning, I saw you save my son. He smiled with half his mouth. Today I am. You're not just the cook, she said before she could talk herself out of it. He closed the ledger. Lantern light gave his eyes a depth that wasn't there at noon. Get some rest, he said. We'll talk in the morning. She went, because a woman knows when a door is shut without a latch. She lay down beside her baby and listened to the ranch fading. The last cup set down, the dog's single bark, the hush after men stack their plates and debts and go to sleep. Dawn came like it always comes here, a thin, honest blade at the horizon. Sarah was up with it, apron tied, sleeves rolled. Thomas was cool to the touch and angry for milk, which was the most beautiful anger she had ever known. She fed him, tucked him into a crate lined with a quilt, and stepped into the kitchen. Cole had already stoked the fire. He handed her a sack of flour and a look that was almost a question. Let me, she said. She measured by eye and hand. Flour, salt, a whisper of soda, buttermilk coaxed from last night's culture. She cut in lard with 2 knives and gentle fingers. She turned the dough just enough, not a stroke more. Rolled, cut, laid the rounds on hot iron. Coffee already spoke from the pot. Bacon waited its turn. Oatmeal thickened obediently under her spoon. The room took on the smell that had raised more men to their feet than bugles. The first hands paused at the threshold. A few hats tipped. A quiet morning, ma'am. Cole said nothing. He watched. She ladled, poured, kept the line moving. The men ate the way men do when the day is about to take a bite out of them. A lanky rider, same sunburned nose, chewed and made a sound like prayer. An older hand dabbed bacon grease with a biscuit and swallowed his words rather than say what it tasted like, because some gratitude sits better unsaid. Garrett returned, all polished boots and sandpaper smile. He aimed his voice at the room. So we've hired a cook now? Did I sign the payroll in my sleep? No one answered. Cole did not look up. Sarah set another pan of biscuits on the board. The stove snapped. Garrett stepped close enough to take in the tidy counter, the smooth motion, the crate where a baby slept with one fist open. He reached for a biscuit. Sarah reached faster, tapped his knuckle with the edge of her spatula like a bell. Plate, she said. A few men coughed into their coffee to hide the grin. Garrett's nostrils flared, but he fetched a plate. He took a bite and hated how much he liked it. That hatred had a future. He leaned in towards Sarah as if they were kin. How long are you staying? Long as the job's here, she said. You won't last a week. Then it won't cost you much, she said, and turned away to fill another bowl. Cole's mouth twitched, then settled. He slid a ledger across the table for a man to sign, then another. He moved through the room with the easy authority of someone who knew every hinge and heart in it. The apron didn't fool anyone who watched closely. But most men don't, not until the day a mask lifts of its own accord. When breakfast was done and the men were saddling up, Cole wiped his hands and nodded toward the back room. There's a spare cot and a trunk. You and the boy use them. No charge until you're on your feet. After that, we'll talk wages. She met his gaze. Why are you doing this? He considered the question like a nail he might not drive straight on the first strike. Because the kid breathed, he said, and because the coffee tastes better when the cook isn't me. Not an answer. The right one anyway. Outside, a bell clanged again. This time 3 quick notes. The yard stilled. A rider came hard from the north fence, hat low, dust boiling from his horse's flanks. Cole, he shouted. Tracks at the draw. Fresh. The room was emptying before the echo died. Colt belts buckled. Spurs cried. Men moved like a machine that had been waiting with patient teeth. Cole was already through the door, apron untied and tossed aside, revealing a shoulder holster she hadn't seen. He didn't reach for the gun. He reached for the saddle blanket and swung up smooth, a man who belonged in leather more than flour. The morning light took him and made an outline Sarah would carry a long time. He looked back once, just once, the way a man looks at a thing he's not ready to name. Lock the door, he said. Keep water on the stove. I'll be back. She stood in the doorway with the baby's warmth seeping through linen, watching dust lift and hang. The men were specks by the time the last heel turned. Quiet returned in a rush that felt wrong. Sarah closed the door. The latch set. The kettle sang. The boy slept on, knuckles soft, breath steady. She pressed her palm to the table where Cole's ledger had been and felt the faint ridges a pencil leaves when it has pressed too hard. Only then did she notice the brass key on a nail by the stove, hanging on a string. It was nothing, and it was something. She didn't touch it. Outside, the ranch held its breath. Inside, the cookhouse smelled of bread and stronger things. And Sarah, who had come looking for a job, had stepped into the first day of a story that would unmask a man, a ranch, and the life she thought she'd already spent. By noon, the heat lay flat over the yard and made the rails shimmer. Sarah worked the cookhouse like she'd been born to it. Coffee refreshed, biscuits turned, onions browned low and sweet for the beans. Thomas slept, woke, fussed, and nursed with the fierce determination of the newly returned. Every time his breath hit steady against her wrist, she felt steadier too. On a lull between pots, she walked the narrow back room. The spare cot, a pine trunk that smelled faintly of soap and cedar, a small window cut to the east where the light came in clean. On a nail by the door hung the brass key she'd noticed, ordinary except for a nick at the bow, and a black thread knotted there, as if somebody meant to mark it from others. She left it alone and returned to the stove. The men rode back late, dust-caked and hungry, their faces pinched from the kind of miles that taste like iron. They ate without flourishes. Track south, someone grunted. Split at the creek. Another shrugged. Coyotes will tell us more by morning. They washed plates and stacked them neat like men who knew order kept chaos from getting ideas. Cole came in quiet, shirt damp, hat haloed with dust, a line of tension at his mouth he had not had when he left. He drank water, then coffee, then set both aside and checked Thomas without asking. The baby's skin was cool, his color good. Only then did Cole's shoulders drop a fraction. "Thank you," Sarah said, and she meant the words for more than the fever. "For what?" he asked as if he genuinely didn't see it. "For showing up," she said. He looked toward the ledger sitting under the window, then back at her, as though showing up was a luxury he rarely afforded himself. "How many biscuits you make?" he asked instead. "Enough." She couldn't stop the small pride in the word. He almost smiled. "We'll need double at sunrise." After supper, when pans were scoured and stacked, a wagon rolled in at an easy pace, the horse too glossy to belong to a working hand. A man in a city vest and a hat too clean for honest win stepped down and brushed non-existent dust from his sleeve. He carried a portfolio like a preacher carries a Bible. "Afternoon," he said into the room, voice precise like a watch. "I'm looking for Mr. Maddox." Heads went up. A few men glanced at Cole. "Owner's not here," Cole said, wiping his hands on a towel that had done real work. The room took its cue from his tone and went still. "You can leave whatever it is with me." The visitor's eyes flicked over Cole's shirt. Sweat, dust, the hint of flour at a cuff, and then to Sarah, as if seeking a more civilized audience. Finding none, he reoriented. "I represent the 1st Territorial. We need signatures on the renewed note for the South Pasture Aqueduct. Without Mr. Maddox's hand, I can't—" "Paper stays until he returns," Cole said. He held out his palm. The banker hesitated only a breath before surrendering the folio. Cole didn't open it. He laid it on the high shelf by the coffee grinder and put a tin cup on top of it as if it were no different than a sack of sugar set aside until needed. The banker blinked. "And when might Mr. Maddox return?" "When he's back," Cole said. The set of his jaw brooked no more questions. The city man smiled in that particular way of men who think smiles are tools. "Tell him Mr. Ellison called." He tipped his hat, not to Cole, but to the room, which is the same as tipping it to no one, and left. Somebody let out a long, low whistle. Laughter followed, the careful kind. Sarah wiped the counter and tried not to stare at the folio under the tin cup. Maddox. It fit the M branded into every plank and gate, into the men's saddles and the iron on the fire. It fit the ledger's leather stamp. Circle M. It should have fit an owner who wrote up loud, not a cook who kept a boy's fever down with willow and patience. "Who is Mr. Maddox?" she asked later, when the door had closed on the last hat and the kettle sang to itself again. "The man who keeps this place standing," Cole said. He was oiling a bridle with the attention some men give to prayer. "And the man every rustler wants to see fail?" "And you?" she asked, because the day had taught her he would answer some questions if they were pointed without malice. "I keep the doors hinged and the men fed," he said. Then he added, as if the words weren't a reveal but a balancing weight, "And I've signed for him when I had to." He said it lightly. The lantern made the light lean gold across his knuckles. Sarah thought of the folio under the tin cup and the way the banker had glanced at Cole and seen only flour, not iron. She didn't press. Her mother had taught her that some truths arrive on their own feet if you leave a chair out for them and stop asking them to hurry. At dawn, the yard went from quiet to motion like a hand had turned a crank. Sarah's kitchen met the day's demand head-on. Biscuits blooming, bacon snapping, coffee thick as patience. The men ate and scattered in a low tide. Garrett arrived last and lingered longest, as though stubbornness could slow a clock. "You sign anything for me," he said to Cole while stirring sugar into coffee he didn't need, "and I'll see to it the old man knows." "I don't sign for you," Cole said, "and you know it." Garrett looked at Sarah as if trying to spray her with whatever bitter he carried. She met his stare without blinking and set a plate down in front of an older hand who had earned his breakfast with 30 years of sun and storms instead of a last name. The older man nodded thanks like a blessing. Garrett swallowed his retort with his coffee. It likely tasted the same. For 3 days the rhythm held. Heat building, men riding, Sarah learning the stove's moods, the pantry's math, the names that stuck, Jake with the sunburned nose, Ben with the careful eyes, little Tom who was neither little nor Tom. Thomas gained weight so fast his blanket felt heavier. He cooed at shadows and men who forgot they could be gentle unless someone small reminded them. On the fourth morning, the wind veered and brought the first taste of a storm that hadn't arrived yet. The dog under the porch whined once. Sarah went for more firewood, and on her return, found the cookhouse door edged open a thumb width. She was almost certain she'd set the latch. Inside, nothing looked wrong. The kettle sang. The bread rose on the back of the stove. The ledger kept its place by the window. She moved through the room like a woman who knows how to read the air. The nail by the stove was bare. The brass key. Her heart knocked once. Twice. She set the wood down carefully and crossed to the back room. The trunk sat under the small window like she'd left it, but the lid wasn't fully flush. She eased it open. Inside, folded quilts, a child's worn shoe that wasn't Thomas's, a tin of buttons, a wooden box with a sliding lid. She slid the lid and found nothing someone desperate for coin would bother with. A spool of black thread, a folded paper packet labeled in a fine, neat hand, and a small brass seal wrapped in cloth. She held the seal as you hold something that could burn without heat. When she unwrapped it, the lantern's light caught an engraved letter. M, around it, a ring of wheat, a horse's head, the year cut small at the bottom. On the inside face, where wax would take the mark, two letters backwards so they'd press forward into proper words. CM, not a brander's iron, an owner's. Bootsteps sounded on the porch. She wrapped the seal, slid it back into its nest, closed the trunk, and stood as Cole stepped in. He took in her face, then the room, as if the story written there might tell him more than whatever words she would pick. Someone was here, she said, too plainly to be nervous. His gaze flicked once to the nail, found it empty, then to the trunk, found it flush, then to her hands, found them steady. You all right? Yes. Thomas too. Good. He crossed the room and opened the stove as though to tend the fire, but she could see his eyes tracking corners, shadows, the angle of the latch. He shut the door and straightened. Men from Dry Creek were seen near the ridge, he said. Too clean to be drifters. If one stepped in here and left empty, he'll be back with dirty friends. Keep a kettle of water boiling. Keep the rifle close. Yours or mine? She asked, almost smiling despite the rise of fear. Both, he said. The corner of his mouth softened and went straight. I'll set extra eyes on the yard tonight. That evening, a shape appeared at the edge of the lamplight while Sarah scrubbed the last pan. Not a man, an old wagon, weathered down to bones. A woman climbed from it slow as a story getting told properly. Silver hair braided tight, shoulders spare, dressed clean and patched where life had rubbed it thin. Do you feed strangers? The woman asked through the screen. We feed hungry, Sarah answered and opened the door. The woman sat, ate half a bowl like she meant to leave room for dignity, and watched the room with eyes that had missed nothing for 60 years. You as cook? She asked finally, nodding toward the corner where Cole was mending a stirrup strap. I'm the cook, Sarah said. The old woman smiled without showing teeth. Good. He's been wearing too many hats. Whose hats? Sarah asked, testing. The old woman set her spoon down. The kind a man puts on when he doesn't want anyone to see his real hair. She lifted her empty bowl a fraction. Another spoon, if you please. Sarah obliged and bit down on the question hammering at her tongue. The old woman ate slow, set the bowl aside, and stood with a grace that said, Bones don't forget how. At the door she paused. Tell your boss lady to watch for a rider with a scar on his cheek and a churchman's coat. He blesses nothing but trouble. We don't have a boss lady, Sarah said. The old woman tilted her head at the ledger, at the tin cup set on the banker's folio, at the crib where Thomas slept, at Sarah's hands raw from work and sure with it. Sure you do, she said, and stepped into the dark. When the night finally took hold, the wind came with it, hot, then cold, then smelling like rain that couldn't make up its mind. Men drifted to their bunks, horses shifted, the water tower ticked as it gave the heat back to stars. Sarah lay on the cot and let the day settle. In the next room, pencil scratched. Cole, writing figures no one else seemed to write. She wondered what name he signed when the banker said he needed Mr. Maddox's hand. Sometime after midnight, thunder rolled far off like furniture moved in a house with many rooms. Thomas murmured and slept deeper. Sarah rose for water and found Cole by the window, the ledger open, the brass seal in his hand. He didn't startle. He didn't hide it. He held it up so the lantern made the M glow like a coal. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I'm learning your stove," she said. It was true and not the truth she was answering. He looked at the seal again, as if it were both weight and compass. "Storm's going to break tomorrow." "Out there," she said. "And in here," he said so quietly she could have pretended not to hear. He wrapped the seal again, set it on the ledger, and placed the brass key on top of both, no longer hiding anything from either of them. "Get what rest you can," he said. "Morning's going to need everything we've got." She stood one heartbeat longer, memorizing the picture. The man in his plain shirt, the ledger, the seal, the key. The coffee smell that had soaked into the beam so deep it would never leave. Then she went back to the cot and lay down beside her son, and watched the sliver of sky in the small east window. Somewhere between thunder and the first weak light, a thought settled that felt like a nail driven straight. The ranch didn't just have an owner in disguise. It had a heart that refused to sign its name to itself. Morning arrived sharp, with wind that bent grass and lifted dust from every seam in the yard. Clouds built heavy to the west, a bruise of thunder sitting on the rim of the horizon. The men saddled in silence, their eyes scanning the sky more than the earth, because storms on the plains never came alone. They brought loose fences, skittish cattle, and sometimes riders who meant worse than weather. Sarah worked the stove steady, but her hands carried the day's edge. She set plates down, refilled cups, and kept Thomas close in his cradle where the air was warmest. Cole moved through the room with the same quiet as always, but his eyes stayed on the yard each time the door swung open. By noon the storm broke. Rain came hard, slanting like shot, turning the dust into black mud. Thunder rolled close enough to shake pans from their hooks. Men pulled cattle into shelter and cursed the sky with the fatalism of men who'd seen worse and would see worse again. Sarah kept bread rising, meat simmering, water boiling on the back of the stove. When Cole stepped in soaked to the bone, she handed him a towel without words. He used it, hung it on a peg, and bent over Thomas to check his color. The baby laughed at him, delighted by Thunder's racket. That small laugh loosened something in Sarah's chest that had been tight since Missouri. The storm passed quick as it had come. By late afternoon, a pale light spread thin over the mud. That's when the rider appeared. Black coat, hat pulled low, scar down his left cheek that split the skin into a map of old violence. He rode in slow, as if the yard belonged to him already. His horse gleamed in the washed light, too fine bone for honest cattle work. Men stopped what they were doing, watching without moving closer. Cole stepped out, no hat, sleeves rolled, hands empty. "You're late," he said. The scarred rider swung down. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile. "Business kept me," he said. His voice carried the smoothness of pulpits, but every word was bent toward menace. "You have something of mine." "Don't think so," Cole said. Sarah stood inside the cookhouse door, Thomas in her arms. She didn't mean to listen, but the air carried every word. She remembered the old woman's warning, scar on the cheek, churchman's coat, trouble blessed nothing. The rider tilted his head, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. Mr. Maddox made agreements, promises written in ledgers. Debts don't vanish when a man changes his shirt. The men shifted, restless. Garrett stepped forward, boots slick with mud, a gleam in his eye that looked too close to satisfaction. "Maybe he should hear you out," Garrett said, voice pitched just loud enough. "If Maddox owes you, it's his burden, not ours." Cole's gaze snapped to him. "Stay out of this." Garrett's grin widened. "Why? Because it touches the name you've been hiding behind?" The yard went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Sarah felt her heart slam. Name. Hiding. She looked at Cole. He didn't deny it. He just stood straighter, water dripping off his jaw, eyes fixed on the scarred man. "Maddox," the rider said, tasting the word like it belonged to him. "Finally." He stepped closer. "I want what's owed." "What's owed is nothing," Cole said. His voice carried iron. You and your friends took more than you ever gave. The paper you wave around doesn't buy you land that feeds men, or the work women lay down to keep it standing. The writer's eyes slid past Cole to the cookhouse door, to Sarah, to Thomas. He smiled that smile again. You've built yourself a family. Makes a man easier to bargain with. His hand drifted toward his coat. Sarah didn't think. She shifted Thomas to one arm and reached for the rifle leaned by the door. Her fingers wrapped the stock tight. She wasn't a shot for distance, but at 10 paces she'd hit what she needed to. Her breath was loud in her ears. Cole's voice cut through. Don't! She froze, rifle halfway raised. His eyes met hers once, steady. Not commanding, not pleading, just steady. Then he looked back to the rider. You want me, you take me. You leave them out. The rider chuckled. Noble, but inconvenient. Debt touches everyone. Rain dripped from the eaves. Somewhere a horse stomped. Then Garrett spoke again, sharp with venom. If he's Maddox, then he lied to every man here. Lied to me. Maybe he deserves what's coming. You'd hand the ranch to Carrion? Cole's voice didn't rise, but it struck harder than thunder. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The rider smiled wider, sensing fracture. Then Sarah's voice cut the yard. Enough! Every head turned. Her hands shook, but her voice held. I don't care what name he signs. He kept my child breathing when fever tried to take him. He kept this ranch fed when your cook ran. That counts more than paper or scars. The rider looked at her with amusement, but his eyes narrowed. Garrett flushed, words drying on his tongue. Cole's gaze flicked to her, something unreadable there. Gratitude, sorrow, something deeper. He turned back to the rider. You have your answer, he said. Now ride. The rider studied him long. Rain dripped from his coat. At last he touched his hat. For now, he said. But debts don't wash away with a storm. He mounted, turned his fine horse, and rode off slow, like a man who knew return was certain. When he was gone, the yard exhaled. Men muttered. Horses shifted. Garrett turned on his heel and stalked away, leaving mud where his boots cut. Cole stayed, water dripping from him, watching the horizon long after the rider was a smudge against the pale sky. Inside, Sarah laid Thomas back in his cradle. Her hands were still shaking. She turned when Cole stepped in. He looked older in that moment, not from years, but from carrying weight. You knew, she said quietly. You are Maddox. He didn't deny it. He only sat at the table, hands spread flat, the ledger between them. I was tired of being Maddox, he said. Thought maybe I could be just Cole. But trouble doesn't forget names. Sarah looked at Thomas, then at him. The storm had washed the dust clean, but left the truth bare. And she understood. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be quiet. The night came heavy, clouds still rolling like smoke across the sky, holding back the moon. Lanterns glowed weak inside the cookhouse, their light no match for the dark pressing close. Sarah sat by the stove, Thomas asleep in his cradle, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Cole sat across from her at the table. He hadn't touched his food. His shirt was still damp from rain, his hair dripping at the ends. But it wasn't weather that weighed on him. It was truth. She broke the silence. Who is Maddox? His jaw worked, but no words came at first. Then he leaned forward, his hands pressed flat on the wood. My name is Cole Maddox. I was raised to take land, not tend it. My family built their fortune on debts, on men like that rider out there. They called it business. I called it blood money. His voice was low, rough. I walked away 5 years ago, changed my name, hired on as cook. Thought maybe if I worked quiet, I could make something honest. Sarah's breath caught. And the ranch? You said, I bought into it, he said, but not as Maddox, not as the man they knew, as Cole Brennan, just another hand who cooked, fixed fences, did what was asked. Only a few knew the truth. Morrison, the old man, he let me stay, said if I wanted to bury the name, he'd help. But you can't bury what follows you. The storm outside groaned, shutters creaking with the wind. Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. That rider, he knew you, knew the debt. Cole nodded. They'll come again. They want what my family promised. Money, land, obedience. Doesn't matter that I left. To them, I'll always be Maddox, a tool, a possession. Sarah's eyes drifted to Thomas, small chest rising steady now in sleep. She thought of fever nights when Cole's hands steadied her boy's breath. She thought of his silence, his strength. He had carried weight no man should. She set her cup down and met his eyes. And now? Cole's voice softened, but the words were sharp. Now you choose. Stay and you walk into my trouble. Leave and you keep safe. I'll make sure of it. Her chest tightened. Safe where? There's no safe out here. Not for women. Not for children. She shook her head. I've already made my choice, Cole. The day you took Thomas in your arms. He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time since she'd met him, his eyes wavered. There was fear there, not for himself, but for her. He wanted to argue, she could see it, but he said nothing. He only nodded, jaw tight, eyes shining in lantern light. By morning, the ranch buzzed. Word of the scarred rider spread like fire. Men spoke in hushed voices, casting glances at the cookhouse. Garrett strutted among them, his smirk sharper than spurs. At breakfast, he slammed his tin plate down louder than needed. Funny thing, he said loud enough for all to hear. Man works beside us for years, claims he's just a cook. Turns out he's Maddox. Lied to every one of us. The room froze. Cole didn't look up from the skillet. Sarah stood at the stove, her hands busy, though her chest burned. Garrett sneered. What else don't we know? Maybe he's here to bleed the ranch dry like his kin. Maybe he brought that scarred devil himself. Enough! Morrison's voice cut from the doorway. The old man stepped in, his cane striking wood with each step. I knew who he was. I let him stay. Because unlike you, Garrett, he works without complaint. He saved cattle, mended fences, kept you fed when you were drunk or lazy. That's more than your mouth's ever done. Garrett's face flushed, but he forced a laugh. So we trust a Maddox now? That's your wisdom? We trust the man, not the name, Morrison said. His gaze swept the room, pinning each man. Any fool who wants to leave can ride now. But if you stay, you follow my word. Cole stays. The silence was heavy. Then Jake Morrison, the lanky cowboy with the scraggly beard, stood. He's a Maddox, sure, but he's our Maddox. Laughter broke, low and nervous, but it spread. The tension eased, but not in Garrett. His eyes burned with resentment. That night, Sarah found Cole outside by the corral, lantern light on his face. She stepped close, wrapping her shawl tight. You didn't answer him, she said softly. Why didn't you fight? Cole stroked the horse's mane absently. Because men like Garrett only get stronger when you wrestle. Better to let him choke on his own anger. He looked at her, tired but steady. But he's not finished. Men like him never are. Before she could reply, a sharp whistle split the dark. A hand signal. Then a shout. Riders! Lanterns swung high. Hooves thundered at the edge of the yard. Shapes moved. 3, no, 5 riders. Faces shadowed, guns glinting in the lantern light. The scarred man was at their head, smile wide as a scar itself. Evening, Maddox, he called. We've come to collect. Cole's rifle was in his hands before Sarah could blink. He shoved her back toward the cookhouse. Inside, locked the door. But she didn't move. Not this time. She gripped his sleeve, eyes fierce. If you fall, there's no safe for us anyway. I stay. The yard exploded with sound. Shouts, hooves, rifles cracking against the night. And Sarah understood. The storm they'd feared had come, and none of them would leave unchanged. The first shot shattered a lantern. Glass rained fire. Shadows bucked wild across the yard. Horses screaming, men cursing, rifles slamming back against shoulders. Sarah didn't run. She moved, low, deliberate, toward the cookhouse door, lifted Thomas from his crate, set him in the wood box she'd padded with folded quilts, and slid him beneath the prep table where flour sacks made a barricade. She kissed 2 fingers and touched his forehead. Then she took the rifle from the pegs. Outside, Cole's voice cut through the chaos. Short commands, no panic. Jake, East Post. Ben, the trough. 2 and 2. Don't bunch. Morrison answered with the weight of years. Spurred boots slapped mud. Gate chains rattled. The ranch braced. The scarred rider rode straight down the center like a man entering a church. Slow, smiling. He fired twice, not at men but at lanterns, starving the yard of light. "Come on, Maddox," he called, voice smooth as oil. "Let's make this simple." Cole stepped into the half-light, hat brim slick with rain, shoulders square. He didn't answer. He fired once. A rider to the scarred man's left pitched from the saddle and hit the mud with a sound that silenced the closest horses. The message was plain. Simple would be earned. Garrett appeared from the dark with a pistol and a grin that didn't fit his face. He moved behind the stacked hay by the chute, eyes on Cole, not the riders. Sarah saw it from the cookhouse porch, how his gun tracked the wrong man. Her stomach went cold. She shouldered the rifle. "Garrett!" Morrison barked from the well. "Hold the north line." Garrett didn't move. His mouth worked like a man arguing with himself. Then he lifted his pistol higher. Sarah exhaled, let the sight settle, and squeezed. Her shot struck the wooden post above Garrett, punching splinters into his hair and hat. Not flesh, not yet. He jerked, flinched, pivoted toward the cookhouse with outrage, not shame. "Don't," she said, voice flat across the yard. No tremor, no plea. "Not him." Rain picked up. The yard hissed. The scarred rider laughed softly. "Pretty widow bites," he said. "All right, Maddox. Trade. Your ledger, your horse, your woman, and the debt ends." Cole's answer was to step 2 paces left and shoot the scarred rider's reins. The stallion reared. The scarred man flowed with it, easy, practiced. He fired back. Cole's shoulder snapped hard and he staggered, then righted, jaw set. Blood darkened his sleeve. He didn't fall. "Inside," Cole called toward the porch without looking, and Sarah heard what lay under the word. "Please." She didn't move. She kept her rifle on Garrett, who had chosen a path and didn't yet know it. The riders split, 2 swinging wide toward the corral, one dismounting and running low along the fence line with a carbine tucked tight, the scarred man circling like a hawk. Ben at the trough fired steady, measured. Jake shouted something cheerful and shot out a cinch. A rider went one way, horse another. Garrett lifted his pistol again, this time toward Cole's ribs. Morrison saw. The old man didn't yell. He didn't curse. He limped, fast as a limping man can, right into Garrett's line and stood there, cane like a stake hammered into ground. His eyes were flint. "Point that iron at a Maddox on my land again," he said softly, "and you'll wish you'd never been born." Rain ticked on his hat brim. The yard waited. Garrett's eyes wobbled, pride fighting fear. He lowered the gun a fraction. A flash at the fence. Movement too fast and low. The carbine runner. He took a knee, leveled at Cole's back. Sarah turned, pivot clean, felt the rifle settle the way it had once on a turkey at 30 paces, when life was quieter. She fired. The runner folded like wet cloth and lay still, hat rolling, rain filling the crown. Cole never looked back. He didn't need to. He knew. The scarred man decided to end it. He dug heels and came hard down the center, horse-throwing clods, pistol steady, that smile dead and bright. Cole stepped into him and fired twice. The first shot took the stallion high in the neck, too high to kill, just enough to blind the charge with pain. The horse screamed and checked. The second shot shattered the scarred man's gun hand. Metal rang on stone. His smile vanished. He stayed in the saddle through pure habit. Then he reached with his left for the knife at his boot and grinned again. Feral now. He didn't see Morrison move. The old man swung the cane with both hands, not elegant, not fast, but true. It cracked across the scarred man's wrist. The knife fell. The horse lurched away and the rider tumbled, rolled, came up on one knee with mud in his teeth. Garrett saw his moment. The easy one. The coward's. He raised the pistol past Morrison's shoulder toward the kneeling man. Sarah held her breath, willing him to take it, to choose clean. But Garrett's hand slid past the scarred rider and found Cole again, as if drawn by a hook in the muscle. Habit beats choice. Sarah's heart dropped. A shotgun boomed from the bunkhouse steps. Jake grinning, hair pasted to his skull, smoke curling from the twin barrels. Garrett's pistol spun out of his grip and skittered into a puddle. Garrett yelped and clutched a hand bleeding from splinters, pride louder than pain. "Damn you, Jake!" "Anytime," Jake said, cracking the shotgun open with a practiced flick. "Boss said north line. This here's north enough." The scarred rider lunged for the drop knife. Cole kicked it away and put his boot on the man's sternum. No theatrics, no speech, just pressure and breath and rain. He leveled the revolver at the man's face. The yard went very quiet, even the horses listening. "You could have been done with all this," the scarred man hissed. "Pay what your blood owes." Cole shook his head. "Debt's paid when the work's honest." He didn't pull the trigger. He holstered, then drew a length of rawhide from his belt and bound the man's wrists quick and hard. "Ben, take him to the tack room. Tie high. We'll wait on the marshal from Red Mesa." The man laughed, even tied. "Marshal's mine." Morrison sank the cane into mud, eyes weary and clear. "Not tonight, he isn't." The fight leaked out of the yard like rain down a barrel. Two riders lay where they fell. One limped off into the dark, a darker trail marking his path. The horses breathed fog. Men exhaled long, kept talking low, the way men do when they've looked over a cliff and stepped back. Cole turned then, finally, toward the porch. He found Sarah under the eaves, hair stuck to her cheeks, dress wet to the knees, rifle at her shoulder, eyes full of everything he didn't know how to carry alone. His gaze dropped to her hands, steady as fence posts. He looked past her, and she nodded. Thomas safe. He let himself breathe. She moved first. Not a run. A march, decisive and clean. She set the rifle down on the step, closed the distance, and put her palm, warm and rain-slick, against his wounded shoulder. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. She reached for his sleeve and tore it with her fingers. No ceremony. Blood had glued cotton to skin. She peeled it back slow. He didn't speak. Neither did she. She pressed a folded cloth there, the good one she kept for biscuits, and the heat of him met the heat of her hand. "Inside," she said, "bread, needle, whiskey." He almost smiled. Almost. "Yes, ma'am." She sewed by lantern light while he sat shirtless at the table, mud drying in the bend of his elbow, rain still in his hair. The cut was a groove, not a hole. He'd been lucky or stubborn. Maybe both. "Left a scar," she said. He glanced at the thin white line under his beard, the old one that never quite faded. "I'm collecting them." "Then start a new collection." She tied off the thread. "Of things that heal." He watched her hands, small, sure, strong in all the right ways. She poured whiskey, pushed the tin toward him, then kept her own hand wrapped around her cup of coffee gone cold again. She didn't drink. She looked him dead in the eye. "No more hiding in kitchens," she said. "No more Cook when you're foreman. No more Brennan when you're Maddox. The men will follow what's true. So will I. But I won't chase a shadow." He held her gaze. A long breath. Then a nod that felt like a door opening. "Cole Maddox, then," he said. "Foreman, partner, cook when needed." "And father when wanted," she said quietly. Not as a test, not a trap. A truth laid on the table like bread. His mouth trembled. He looked toward the wood box under the table. Thomas slept, fists tight around nothing, lips puckering in dreams. Cole swallowed. "Wanted," he said. The word broke a little in the middle. He let it. Boots sounded on the porch. Men shuffled, uncertain, then stopped at the threshold. Morrison cleared his throat. "We'll have riders on the road at dawn," he said. "We'll wire Red Mesa anyway. If their marshal's rotten, I know a deputy in Pueblo who isn't." He eased his hat back and looked at Sarah. "You got grit, Mrs. Whitman. We're in your debt." "I just kept my own," she said. "You took us in." The old man nodded, eyes kind. "Bread tomorrow?" he asked, as if asking for sunshine at dawn. "Bread," she said. "And stew. Men will eat." Jake poked his head around Morrison's shoulder, grin wide, hair sticking up like straw. "Biscuits, if it ain't too bold to ask." "Biscuits," she said, and his grin somehow got wider. They left them then, doors and windows latched, the yard muttering itself back to order. Garrett lingered last. Bandage wrapped his hand. Pride wrapped the rest. He didn't step in. He didn't apologize. He looked at Cole with hate and at Sarah with something small and mean that used to be a boy's jealousy and had grown into a man's weakness. Then he turned and walked into rain he hadn't earned. Consequences would come for him in daylight. They ate at the table, 2 bowls, 1 spoon passed between. The storm tired of itself and wandered off south. Coyotes tried a song and thought better of it. The ranch settled, the way living things do when they know they've been spared. Tomorrow, Cole said, staring at the steam from the stew. We post watches, fix the eastern fence, send word along the line. We pull the ledger pages that matter and make copies. We ride to Morrison's lawyer in Dry Creek. Tomorrow, she said, and set her hand on his good shoulder. Tonight we sleep, in turns. A pause. If you can. He shook his head. I can, if you're here. It wasn't poetry. It didn't need to be. She stood, crossed to the back room, and made up the narrow bed with blankets warm near the stove. She laid Thomas between 2 rolled quilts, a little valley so he wouldn't roll. She set the rifle within reach and the needle on the windowsill, thread still caught in the eye. When she turned, he was in the doorway, big in the frame, smaller without the weight he'd carried alone for years. She lifted the quilt and he lay down on top of it, boots off, shoulders barely touching the pillow, careful as a man in a church pew. She lay beside him, not touching, not yet. Their breaths found the same pace. The lantern made a small gold circle on the ceiling, and the night folded itself around the 3 of them. Sarah, he said in the dark, voice nearly gone, I'll spend the rest of my days putting your name where my fear used to be. She didn't answer with words. She reached out, found his hand, and set it on the quilt between them. He laced his fingers with hers. Not a promise. A practice. Dawn came clean. The storm left a sky scrubbed blue and bright. The yard steamed. Men moved with the slow care of the newly spared, laughing too loud, slapping backs harder, grateful for coffee like a sacrament. Sarah baked as if the sun depended on it. Biscuits high and light, eggs sliding easy, bacon crisp. Every plate she set down said, we're still here. Mid-morning, a rider from Red Mesa crested the ridge with a white cloth tied to his rifle and a badge on his vest that caught the light honest. He spit, looked at the bound man in the tack room, and nodded once. He ain't mine, he said, but I'll take him just the same. You got pages? Cole handed over copies, not the book. The marshal read a line, grunted, tucked them into his coat. You folks made yourselves a windbreak, he said. Others will be glad to stand in it. Garrett watched from the porch, pale, brittle. Morrison didn't look at him. Some reckonings arrive on their own feet. When the dust of the marshal's horse settled, Cole walked to the center of the yard and looked at his men. Not running, not hiding. A Maddox who chose fences and bread. He spoke plain. We work, we pay, we protect our own. If that's not your kind of ranch, saddle up. No one moved. Ben spat, smiled. Jake whooped. Even the horses seemed to breathe easier. He turned then to Sarah. The yard hushed because it could feel a moment choosing to be a moment. He didn't kneel. He didn't speech. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. I am Cole Maddox, he said, and I am Brennan when I need the quieter name. I am foreman, partner, cook when called, and I'm asking to be Thomas's father if he'll have me. I want you to marry me, Sarah. Not because I saved you, because you saved me from being a man who eats alone. Her mouth trembled into a smile that had crossed deserts to reach this morning. She didn't rush. She let the wind carry warm over the yard. Then she stepped in close and set 2 fingers under his jaw, turned his face toward hers and spoke so the men in the mountains could hear. Yes. He closed his eyes like a prayer finished. The yard exhaled as one body, shouts and hats in the air, a pan banged with a spoon, Jake's whistle wild and off-key. Morrison's laugh rasped like a file, proud and tired and young again for a heartbeat. Sarah leaned in until her forehead touched Cole's. Go wash up, she said, practical as sunrise. You're bleeding into your shirt, and there's fence to mend. He grinned then, quick and clean, and it made him look like a boy who'd never learned the word debt. Yes, ma'am. He started toward the pump. She turned back to the stove. Thomas kicked his blanket and gurgled at a dust mote sailing through sun. The ranch, stubborn and scarred, went back to work. If this story held you, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments which moment gripped you most. The lantern shattering, Sarah's shot, or the quiet yes. Your words keep these frontier tales riding.